Доброе утро.
A very good morning, everybody. At least I hope it's a good one.
Кто наставил плюсиков в расписании.
And I'm certainly so grateful to all those who chose to attend my speech. That's why I'm feeling scared. Previously I was sitting with my back to you, so it was okay, but now I'm really scared. No, I'm kidding, actually.
Поговорим мы.
So our plan today is to discuss something which is exceedingly simple to some people, but probably not so simple to others. And it's not really a complicated presentation. So even if you don't know much about attacking corporate networks, well, at least let me put it differently. If you don't know much about attacking corporate networks, you stand to learn lots of useful things here. We are going to learn how to detect 95% of attacks while knowing only 5% of techniques. Techniques and sub-techniques, depending on the terminology you're used to. And the subtitle is it really that difficult to detect persistent advanced threats? I should probably start by telling you something about myself. I'm Oleg Skulkin. I'm in charge of the Digital Forensics Lab at Group IB.
Сильно интересуюсь цифровой криминалистикой, реагированием на инциденты и киберразведкой.
I'm really interested in incident response and forensics and cyber intelligence. I've been doing it for over 10 years. I've authored a bunch of books and studies on this subject, including incident response techniques for ransomware attacks. And if you want, you can get a digital copy from me, or alternatively, I guess you know where to find digital copies of books you are interested in. And I'm still certified by GIAC, though I'm not really sure this certification will last long. Who knows?
Начнем опять же с простых
вещей.
Вот смотрите,
let me start with simple things. I think everybody knows what pizza is, and we are going to use the example of pizza to analyze attacks. And by way of a disclaimer, I should say that we're only discussing attacks targeting corporate networks. And B, we are talking about things happening between gaining initial access and doing, say, data exfiltration or encryption or, some other malicious activities. So everything that happens between these 2 points. So, for example, your defense system has not been able to respond well, somebody is already on your host, or somebody has got, valid credentials to do things on your network. Like, how would you like to detect this kind of malicious activity? So let's go back to pizzas. You will see that these pizzas are different. However, they all have common components. So each one has dough, each one has a sauce, and most of them have cheese in them. Same is true for attacks. The kill chain can be pretty long.
Атакующие могут использовать довольно, самые разные тактики и техники.
And as part of this kill chain, attackers may be using diverse techniques and tools, but there is still a list of techniques and sub-techniques you will see pretty much every time, regardless of whether you're responding to a particular incident or you're reading about threat studies, or you're reading threat studies produced by vendors or independent researchers. There will be this common denominator. There will always be those things.
Значит, как мы можем эту информацию использовать?
So how can we use this kind of information in forensics, in research, and in proactive threat study? So there is the kill chain, like I said, or the attack life cycle.
Но, тем не менее, есть компоненты, которые
this is like
сравнительно постоянны, по крайней
the filling of the pizza, but there are also components which are very, very ubiquitous, and I'm going to show lots and lots of examples today, coming back from, our incident research activities, both in Russia and abroad. And I'm also going to quote various incidents that were investigated by other people, but, we still know how they did it from, say, public sources of information. So in every attack, there will be a particular set of techniques which are very easy to detect. And we can use this so that even if we do not have coverage, I mean, if we don't have a CEM, like we've got an antivirus system, we've got a firewall, and that's it. Or maybe we also have a bunch of scripts we can run in order to collect some information. So even with this kind of data, we should be able to detect indicators of compromise, IOCs, if they are there. So these are the top 10 techniques, the ones that I want to cover in my presentation. I guess you know all of them. At least I'm assuming most people in the audience will know them. There is this trend where people come up with top 10 lists. Usually, however, they are made in an automated manner, like a system will parse many reports, and this kind of frequency analysis will give you the top 10 list. The issue with such lists is that many reports will fail to cover the whole life cycle of an attack. For example, they may be analyzing a particular instance of malware or ransomware, and out of the whole kill chain, they will only be looking at a small fraction. So these automatically compiled lists are not really good at representing the reality. Now, this list is based on fully or nearly fully reconstructed incidents that we investigated, and it's also based on reports that covered the whole attack lifecycle. We covered everything they did after they gained initial access, well, to, doing the bad thing, so to speak. So you can play this game. If you read some other reports, you can actually check how many of these techniques I'm showing in this list were actually leveraged by the perpetrators, and you will be surprised at how often they are featured.
Опять же, есть люди, которые очень много знают, занимаются research.
Some people do know a lot. They do research, they identify new techniques, and it's great. And attackers can indeed use those new techniques. However, this tendency to go looking for something really sophisticated may actually be counterproductive. If you consult MITRE-ATT&CK, you will find like 400 sub-techniques and 200 techniques, and looking for each of them is nearly impossible. You can certainly automate some of the search, but certainly not all of it. And if we are talking about threat hunting, even if it is automated, you will still have to deal with a huge amount of data. And it's impossible to cover everything all the time. It's an old meme. We've actually used it in some other presentations before, but I still find it funny. So you see one character here was looking for hardware additions, such as, Raspberry Pi and so on, things that are used in the wild, but not really that often. And his colleague comes running and says, you know what? We've been compromised for 3 months already, and they've been using scheduled tasks, and we haven't really noticed them because we thought that things like this would be detected. Unfortunately, it's based on a real-life case. So let's talk now individually about each and every technique from the list, and I'm going to illustrate them with real-life examples. And I've tried to select my cases here primarily from the areas that matter to the Russian landscape of threats. So the first technique is PowerShell. I don't really remember a single report by us or other threat researchers that wouldn't mention PowerShell. PowerShell is used indeed
вещи, которые можно что-то выполнять,
ubiquitously,
но
and
у
using it
у
is so
злоумышленников
simple.
особая любовь, ну, в принципе, не только у злоумышленников.
No,
Мы сами
perpetrators, but
довольно
actually
часто
not just
им
perpetrators,
решать
we
можно
will also
практически
be
любые
using
задачи,
PowerShell quite often.
поэтому, собственно,
And it
такой
can
метод
be
и для
used
злоумышленников.
to do so many
Посмотрим
things,
на несколько примеров,
which is
то есть
actually
кто
why
и
it's
как
so
их юзает, при
ubiquitous.
каких этапах.
So let's look at how it's
Первый —
being
это Red
used
Curl,
and at what
это
stages.
ребята, которые
So
активно
Red Curl,
атакуют компании в России, они в
now
основном
these guys are quite
занимаются
active in
промышленным
attacking
шпионажем.
Russian
То есть
companies, and
это
most of
не
what they're doing
специализированная
is
настольная группа,
industrial
такая более
espionage. They're
коммерциализированная
not an
группа, тем не
APT,
менее,
they're effectively a
они вот как
commercial
раз
operation.
очень часто использовали самые разные скрипты. У вас, в принципе,
And they've
есть
used all sorts of
редактированный
scripts.
фрагмент того, что было,
So
но,
what I am
опять
showing
же,
here is a
ничего
redacted
такого
version
нового
of
в этом
what
нет.
they
Я
did.
думаю, что
There is
для
nothing special
большинства
about it, right?
подобные вещи кажутся подозрительными.
I
тем не
guess that
менее, могут
for the
быть абсолютно
majority of people
легитимными.
in
Вот. И опять
audience,
же, эти
stuff
техники,
like this
несмотря на то,
will
что
look suspicious,
распространенные,
although
они
it
могут
can be legit.
генерировать некоторое количество
Although
шума,
these
и они
techniques
просто
are
эффективны для
ubiquitous,
проактивного
they can
поиска,
generate
когда
a
вы,
certain
например,
amount of noise,
если
which
это
makes
одна
them
организация
ideal
отдельно,
for
можете
proactive threat search.
убрать шум, да, то есть понять,
So, for
где у
example,
вас
if
этот
you can
шум
remove the
становится
noise,
легитимным,
which, like,
соответственно,
if you
это убрать
control the
и
organization, should be
фокусироваться уже
easy,
на том,
you will
чтобы
be able to
исправить
see
и
where
действовать
this
там, где
noise
это
is legitimate, and
подозрительно. И уже
then,
с этим
therefore, you should
работать,
be able to
как
identify the
проводить
really
какой-то триаж, какой-то
suspicious elements.
Значит,
Now
чтобы
you can do
убрать
your
Cobalt Strike,
triage or your investigation.
понятно, должно
Cobalt
детектироваться
Strike
элементарно,
requires
тем не
no
менее, как
introduction. This
показывает
stuff
практика,
should
даже
be
последних инцидентов
very easily detected.
все
However,
еще
the
очень активно
recent incidents have
используются
shown
загрузчики биконов на основе PowerShell,
that
и
beacon
в журналах
uploaders on the
событий от
basis of
подобных
PowerShell are
строк
still used a
постоянно
lot,
просто
and in
огромное
event
количество.
logs, you will still see lots and lots of strings like this.
Популярный ботнет, еще
Emotet,
один пример.
a popular botnet.
Сейчас возникают у злоумышленников некоторые проблемы с доставкой из-за того, что
Perpetrators
по
now
умолчанию
often
выполненные
have
macros
difficulties
Они
delivering
ищут
their
какие-то
payload
ну,
because
способы не совсем
macroses
новые.
are
Вот,
switched off by
например,
default. So they're looking for new ways of doing it. And this is not really a new way. So the guys have been using LNK files in order to upload their payload to a host. Well, because using documents is no longer a viable option. So if, as far as I remember, there was an ASL file, and inside it, there was a label that would effectively launch PowerShell, and payload would be downloaded from compromised websites. So you don't really need to use it, say, at the initial stage or for lateral movement, although it can be used like this. For example, you can collect network information, and by way of example, I'm showing REvil, and REvil is a pretty well-known group, mostly doing ransomware, and apparently they're back in business, though it's not guaranteed. So naturally, such commands and commandlets are used by lots and lots of attackers. So it's indeed very popular. Well, next one is the subject of the meme I previously showed, scheduled tasks. I guess it's one of the most popular techniques, and it seems to be impervious to time. It's used by very simplistic cyber criminals to Chinese state-sponsored groups. So, if it comes, so, when we talk about persistence in the system, scheduled tasks are the weapon of choice, and it's often used to escalate privileges as well. So Red Curl likes using scheduled tasks. They would use it to execute malicious script, and it was followed with PowerShell, which means that, they can be easily used in a combo. Now, Red Curl is something we consider cybercrime, not an APT. But take group 413. They are often associated with the Chinese government, at least by numerous researchers. So again, in the scheduler, they would create a task to launch the malicious file. And note, by the way, how it's all set up. Because we're going to discover with some other techniques, there will be lots of overlaps. I mean, one technique is often used in conjunction with another one, which props up the popularity of all the techniques on this list. And the final example is the Quackbot, another popular botnet, although pretty old, but it's still there, still propagating, still developing.
Once, соответственно, здесь это использовалось для того, чтобы привлечь.
So you see once there, which means that they only used it once to escalate privileges rather than to persist on the system. And if, for example, they didn't work, they would still get persistence on the system using the same scheduled tasks technique. Another one is service execution. Actually, so many post-exploitation frameworks rely on this technique, and it's all based on PHDays and similar. And just like, say, Mimikat, it's not used as much, but the underlying technique is. Well, take, for example, Old Gremlin. Well, these guys are also making a little business out of ransomware, and they're mostly attacking Russian companies. So do you know what's happening here, by the way? If you can read this string. Can you guess what Firefox.exe is? Absolutely, it's just dumb.
Impacket, например, SMB-exec, который также...
Impacket, SMB-exec. It will also create lots and lots of events in the system log with event ID 4075, if I'm not mistaken.
Используется, здесь пример тоже одной из групп, ассоциированных с Китаем.
And again, I'm showing here an example associated with a repeatedly Chinese group, a very popular tool, almost as popular as Cobalt Strike. In fact, a growing number of hackers are using it. It was not as popular before, and it's not as easy to detect, really. Moreover, some of the defense tools are using it. And in order to avoid, false positives, sometimes, detection systems turn a blind eye to it. Now, PHDays is here, but in fact, there are lots and lots of tools based on it, such as PHDays and WinExec and so on, which will also create a service on a remote system and will launch, the payload that you need. It may often be used on corporate networks, and it's indeed a great thing to do proactive search. And, to check if it's your system administrator doing something, or if it's a legit script, or something suspicious is indeed happening.
Модификация ключа run тоже старая техника.
Modification of run key. It's an old technique, but I find it exceedingly funny every time. And let me show you this example. I think everybody's reading Secure List. If you aren't, please do. So Secure List recently had a great post on using event logs for storing shellcodes. It's extremely complicated, really. So they took a legitimate WAR fault and then they copied it to Windows task. I mean, that's weird. No legit binary would be launched from a Windows task folder, but what can you do? Then they did delayed hijacking and lots of other things, and in the end, they would actually write to run, the address to leading to see Windows tasks. So it's a complicated journey taking you all the way back to Windows tasks, right? So browse any reports there is a huge probability that the malware you will be reading about will be using this particular key. It's indeed such a banal way of getting persistence on the system, and it's still being used not just by the bots that are being, sent out through major emailing campaigns, but also by PHDays. Well, naturally, we assumed that the system being defended has some antivirus and some firewall. And sometimes, attackers don't even want to bypass them as long as they can switch them off. And some of them actually do it with a lot of chutzpah. So let me give you a specific example. I think you must have heard about Lapsus, a pretty well-known group that was able to hack Microsoft and NVIDIA. So, they broke them after the after the source codes were released.
Что атакующие делали в сети. Ну вот, собственно, они подключились по RDP там какому-то хосту, которым...
So they connected via RDP to some host for which they got the credentials, and there was an endpoint engine, and they simply downloaded Process Hacker of SourceForge, killed the agent, and did everything they wanted. They installed Mimikatz and so on and so forth. It is possible, even with large corporations like NVIDIA, surprisingly enough. So Lapsus and Process Hacker, but it doesn't have to be Process Hacker, and actually it all depends on the preferences of the attackers, because it could be Gmer and PC Hunter. Guys doing ransomware really love this stuff. When you do have this kind of access, you can do lots of things. Well, it doesn't mean that they will really be switching everything off. You can still find lots of networks which are only protected by Defender. And, people may often fail to notice that.
В рамках расследования инцидента всем было просто, и они хотят жизнь...
Now, if they want to delay incident investigation, what they can do is to use PowerShell, something we discussed previously, in order to clean the event logs, which is the second example here in the screen. And the third one actually involved switching the Defender up. So if somehow Defender is getting in your way, you can do that. And B65 is a pretty interesting group, and they are currently attacking Russian organizations as well. They are mostly hacktivists. So they took Conti source codes, and Conti is a ransomware, and there was a well-known leak after what started. So they took the Conti source codes, they edited them a bit, and now they are spreading them in Russian organizations. So they don't really want to be paid. They just say, stop what's happening right now, and then we shall stop our operations. RunDLL, you have already seen it for sure. It's a very popular binary. It's signed, which means that you should be able to execute malware, malicious DLLs, or what have you. It will be quite good for executing other binaries, not sure. Another example with Conti I've just mentioned. Actually, this leak didn't stop them. They're terrorizing Costa Rica now. I understand that, real hell has broken out in Costa Rica. I understand that they have encrypted some governmental systems in Costa Rica, making lives difficult. Now, this is a Cobalt Strike beacon, nothing really special. So they effectively launch it with a RunDLL, and Iced ID is another bot, which is often used in ransomware attacks. It's analogous to Emotet and QA bots, QAK bots, and so on. There are actually lots of them. They can be seen quite often in Russia as well, but they're not really functional in Russia. I mean, they will arrive in Russian organizations, but they won't really attack them.
И еще одна группа, спонсируемая государством, Ocean Lotus.
And there is another APT, Ocean Lotus.
Есть run-DLL, есть вредоносная библиотека.
So you see the run-DLL here and a malicious library that will be effectively stored God knows where and will be pretty easy to detect.
Так, следующая техника — это
And the next technique
credential dumping.
is credential dumping. Super popular as well. Everybody has heard about Mimikatz for sure. I guess many of you guys have re-engineered it to avoid detection. But naturally, there is more to this world than Mimikatz. There are so many techniques that should enable you to get access to credentials because, when attackers gain access to certain hosts, they often will not have the privileges to move around, to find data, or to hijack the whole network in order, for example, to spread their ransomware. If we go back to the case I previously mentioned, where the process hacker was used to actually kill the defense agent. They first downloaded process hacker of SourceForge, and then they downloaded Mimikatz of GitHub. So they got the credentials, and from that moment on, they were unstoppable. And B65, another example related to them. So we see again here, Alsasda. So we've been previously guessing, what masqueraded as Firefox. Different software here, but obviously this is the same good old process dump used to get access to creds. And another technique here. So it was with Old Gremlin that we first found this technique in the wild. And we found it interesting back then. Now it's being used by everybody. It's super trivial, really. So Common CVS DLL is a default library. You don't even need to bring anything to the host. You can abuse what's already there and have your dump. You can also use it together with a task manager, for example. So it's also being used a lot.
Естественно, когда уже есть доступ
Naturally, when you already have access to a particular host, and you want to go further, as an attacker, you will want to know where you are, what kind of network it is, and how you can move further. In any attack against the corporate network, this attack will be used. This could be, say, network scanners, says perfect network scanner, which is so much loved by APTs and ransomware operators. It's indeed super popular. Now, when we're talking about threat investigation, the problem is that system administrators love it as well, and they will often put it, say, in Intel. So if you can find a host which has it, it may easily turn out to be a legit one. So the trend with attackers is often to see what's available on the host and to try using what's there. Well, for example, if there is TeamViewer there and system administrators will be using it, well, they will take the creds from the TeamViewer. Well, naturally, you can install your own remote access tools, and many people do that. But why do that? If there is no monitoring in place, and most corporations still don't have it, it will be very easy to dupe the defenders, and thus effectively get yourself a backdoor. So let's go back to this issue of finding additional information on the network. And again, we see red curl here. So AD Explorer, sysinternal is totally legit, right? It actually has graphic interface, a GUI. But there is a trick. If you launch it from CLI with a snapshot argument, you can actually get a snapshot of everything. And then you won't really need to use, it's in the graphic form, in the GUI form. Another one
Точно
from
так же
APC41 with DS
и
query.
использовали. Они, правда, ее приносили с
So
собой,
they
она
used the
по
same. Well, they
умолчанию
actually
не
brought
была.
it with them.
AD
It wasn't
Explorer
on the
где-то
system
был,
by
где-то они
default.
его копировали и
AD
сами запускали.
Explorer
SDS
was
Query
on
здесь
some
он
systems, but not the
лежит,
others.
скажем так, не по
But
самому
ADS
тривиальному пути.
query
Поэтому
cannot be
вполне
found
себе тоже
at
легко
its
репетируемая история, но
trivial
тем не менее,
location.
если он, например,
So
был бы,
this is something that would be
они точно так же
relatively
могли бы им
easy to
воспользоваться.
detect, but had it been there to
И
start with, they would
мой
have been
любимый
able to
пример
use it.
Dark Halo это как раз и
And my favorite example, Dark Hello.
одно из названий Nobelium. Это как раз
It's
ребята,
one of the
которые,
names of
когда
Nobelium.
SolarWinds атаковали, когда была supply chain атака.
So these are the people who actually attacked SolarWinds.
Атаку, и да, у тебя может быть
And this is how they performed their
Cobalt Strike
supply
Beacon,
chain
который
attack.
раз в 14
So you
дней
can have,
будет
for example, a
стучать
Cobalt
на
Strike beacon,
админку.
which
Тем не
will
менее, как
access
только
or
эта
will,
атака начнет
query the
развиваться,
admin
и
every
людям нужно
14
что-то
days.
делать,
And
там как-то
when the attack
собирать
starts,
какую-то информацию о сети и так далее,
people will
то
start
в
collecting
любом
information on the
случае
network.
им нужно что-то запускать, и пусть вот здесь,
In any
кстати,
case,
здесь
they will
defined,
need to run
в
something.
этом примере, его можно, в принципе, попробовать
And
угадать
undefined here
по
in this
аргументу
example,
командной строки.
I think you can easily guess it if you look at the command line arguments.
И попробуйте его переименовать,
And
он не будет работать. Он
if
работает
you
только
just
именно в
download
информации.
ID find
Тем не менее, он
and you
пропащий,
rename it,
всё,
it
и у вас
won't
это
really
всё будет
work.
работать.
It has
Вот
to
как
be
и здесь
called
находится вся
idfind.exe, but
вот
then you
эта
can patch it.
история, когда мы говорим о сборе информации о сети, там обычно много команд запускается, и на этом этапе
So usually, when you're collecting network information, lots of commands will be launched, and it's very easy to detect such attacks at this particular stage.
протокол удаленного рабочего стола,
Remote desktop protocol,
если
the
ее можно
penultimate
использовать,
technique in my
ее
list.
используют абсолютно всегда.
If it
Тоже
can be
вне
used,
зависимости
it
от
will
того,
be used,
насколько это
regardless
сложная угроза, скажем так,
of how
так как это
sophisticated
удобно,
a
особенно
particular
если мы
threat
говорим
is,
о
because
поиске
it is
каких-то
so
данных,
convenient,
очень часто
particularly if
используют.
you're looking
И
for
абсолютно
data.
все, в принципе, точно так же можно абсолютно любой отчет открыть
In
и
fact,
Remote Desktop
study,
Protocol там будет
browse any
100%.
reports, and you will find
Опять же,
RDP there.
о чем
I
здесь
can
нужно
guarantee
помнить,
that.
что не всегда
Let me
он,
emphasize here
не всегда им можно воспользоваться. Ну, злоумышленники тоже
that RDP
прекрасно понимают,
sometimes cannot be
поэтому
leveraged, but again, attackers
они
will know
могут
that.
использовать самые разные скрипты для того,
Which
чтобы
means
на
that they
удаленном
will
хосте
be able to
точно
use
переходить
various
с
scripts.
хоста на хост
Like,
Б.
for
Я могу
example,
на
if I want to
хосте
go
Б,
from host
например,
A
через
to
тот же
host B,
PSExec, через тот же
I
через
can
тот
use
же
a
PA
PS
exec, про
exec
который я уже говорил,
or a PA
можно
exec, which I
запустить
mentioned
этот
previously.
скрипт,
I can launch the script
заенейблить
there,
terminal
then
services, и
enable
уже можно
terminal
спокойно
services,
с одного
and
хоста
then
на другой ходить. Опять же, если
I should
обратите
be able to
внимание,
access
вот
one host
здесь,
from the
например,
other.
в первом примере, где это R-Able, там это
Look at the
снова
REvil example here.
PowerShell. То есть
Again, the guys are
техники,
using
они
PowerShell.
очень сильно
So, like I said,
перекликаются между
all
собой,
these techniques
и,
are
ну,
so
может быть,
often used
где-то
in
половина или
combination.
даже 2/3 из вот этого топ-10,
I
он
guess
вообще
that
прям
one half, or
постоянно из
maybe
атаки в
2/3
атаку,
from
вне
this top 10
зависимости от
list
сложности этой атаки,
will be
перекликается.
found in
Ну, еще
combination
один
in
пример,
every
тоже это
attack.
был bad-файл. Ну, здесь в примере это Black
So
Cat, тоже
another
оператор
bad file
программного
here. So
вымогательства.
in a
Она
particular
называется
example
Alpha
here, we're looking at Black
Script,
Cat.
как ее исследователи назвали.
They're
Сам
often
скрипт,
called
он
Aleph as well,
перекочевывает
but they're
один к
effectively
одним к
ransomware
другим, потому
guys.
что, ну,
So
в
the
принципе,
same
сейчас
script is being used by different operators
атаки с использованием программ-вымогателей, они
because so many attacks today leveraging ransomware
партнерские программы, соответственно, так в их основе партнерские
are based
программы.
effectively
Эти
on
партнеры могут
partnerships.
прыгать из одной программы
And
в
since
другую. Кто-то
these
работает
partners,
сразу с большим
operate like
количеством
this, they will
разных
be
партнерских
using
программ,
different
например,
types of
четырьмя. То есть
software.
вот есть там
Some of
какие-то
these operators will be using
и
like
вот
4
некоторые
different
могут
types of
выбирать
software at the same
Ravel
time.
распространить, или Black Cat,
So they
или
will be
Dark Side,
deciding whether
или
to
еще
use
там
Revel
самые
or
разные
Dark
компании.
Side or a
Тоже
Black
всё
Cat
очень
or
зависит.
something else.
И последняя техника,
And the
о
final
которой
technique in my
мы
list
поговорим, это SMB, тоже
is SMB,
суперпопулярно, как для продвижения
super
соцсетей,
popular
так
as well,
и,
both
в принципе, для того, чтобы
for
посмотреть, а что есть на том или
propagation
ином хосте.
inside the network and
Если
for
говорить
checking
про
out what's available on
программу-вымогателей,
this
там
or that
можно
host.
просто через него примонтировать себе диски C там всех хостов. И
So,
сразу
for
с одного
example,
хоста
in
все это
ransomware, you
тоже, в
can
принципе,
just,
можно
mount all C drives
здесь
from a single
всё
host
будет,
and encrypt
здесь
all
всё
of them,
будет
and that's
примерно
it.
так же. Мы уже
Bingo.
смотрели, да, на service execution, то есть когда используется
It's very similar to what we discussed with the case of service execution, where you would use a particular service to launch stuff on a remote host. And we could have used the same examples with PSExec here, because in fact, they have a very similar, shall I say, kill chain, because it actually will create a service and execute something. So WinExec here is analogous to PSExec. And if you have a Linux host, for example, then the attackers will be able to get access to a VPN and then get access to the internal network and add their machine. And then if they want to do stuff on Windows systems, they will be using WinExec instead of PSExec. CrackMapExec. I guess most people here will know what it is, which is a mini post-exploitation framework, which enables you to collect network information and execute stuff on remote hosts. In fact, pretty much any post-exploitation framework, present at least, should enable you to create a remote service and launch things. So if we're talking about defenders, there will be artifacts for them, such as instantiation of a new service. And the same applies to Cobalt Strike, really. So with Cobalt Strike, there are several opportunities to launch stuff remotely, and PSExec PSIH was exactly this PowerShell example. You remotely launch PowerShell and then launch something else inside it. And another example here is jump PSExec, where you already have an executable. It's actually the old version. We can actually see the IP address of the machine. But if your version is, is beyond 4.1, then obviously this text will be different. So, if you're interested in seeing all this stuff in the wild, you can consult our report. This is something we've been publishing for the past 2 years. Ransomware Uncovered is the name. No advertising there. This is, pure play report. So you can consult this one, for example, to check out how attackers had fun with corporate networks. And all this stuff naturally is mapped to MITRE ATT&CK system, and there is a heat map there showing which techniques were used more often, less often, and you can download it naturally free of charge if you're interested. This is it really for me. If you want to ask any questions, I will be happy to take them. Thank you.
Добрый день. Извините, немного
провокационный вопрос. It may be a provocative question. So you've told us about this 10 popular techniques, but this is PHDays 11. What can you propose? On the basis of your recent experience, what's, particularly relevant now? Well, talking about brand new techniques is actually a dubious proposal, and things are not really changing that fast. So many vulnerabilities have already been discovered. To try answering your question, I would be thinking about supply chain attacks. I'm not talking here about, getting initial access, nor am I talking about data exfiltration.
Какие-то ресурсы, чтобы DDoS-атаки проводить и так далее. Но, опять же, если мы возьмем еще начало и конец, то, во-первых, наверное, стоит сказать о выгрузке данных.
But if we actually look at these stages,
это тоже отдельная техника.
But naturally, we should consider exfiltration of data to cloud data storages. This is extremely popular now. In the present threat landscape, lots of operators have ransomware, for example. Rather than just, propagating on the corporate networks, they just, exfiltrate data and they demand ransom. Same is true, actually, for hacktivists. So that would be my answer. If you want technique number 11, that would be it. Of my question.
Ну, в принципе, да, только надо, опять же, следить за тем, что...
So if you see, I guess the question is about PowerShell. Well, yes, you should be able to switch it off. Now, what you need to remember is that there are defense tools.
Это очень часто бывает, да, то есть вот есть
And very often this stuff is online uncontrollably, so to speak. There were cases when people would have IDR, but, they wouldn't really be checking it. So, well, a vendor told us to install it, and we thought it would be working. Yes, we do have SOC, but, Security Operations Center, they still need to repair their printers, so they don't have the time for your PowerShell business. And it's not just happening in Russia, it's happening in other countries as well.
За кем?
Типами. За основными типами, что вы назвали. Как вот, вы говорили про сок, что они там спят, а как...
So you've told us about people, napping during their shifts at SOC, but how can we actually monitor it? Well, you need third-party SOC and EDR. This is the way of doing it reliably with as little, involvement on your part as needed. Well, I guess it's a thank you.
Мы как? У нас есть микрофон для ребят или как?
So do we have a mic? Yes.
Спасибо за доклад. С точки зрения сока.
Thanks for your report.
Вы сказать небольшую боль.
So you've touched upon a pain point here when you talked about SOC. How do we distinguish between the noise and what's really happening? Now, what's quite common is that, you have a shadow tool that launches an obfuscated PowerShell script. And, this is happening really very, very often. So as a forensics expert, can you please tell us, how can we distinguish between malicious obfuscated scripts and bona fide things? Well, this is something that we run against, so we run into ourselves. Just like everybody else, we've got our own SOC, and our SOC is not monitoring a single firm, it's monitoring lots of companies. I can relate to that. So things are happening there all the time. And for the past 6 months, we've been profiling certain companies. So we have automated detection scripts, so to speak. We know, for example, that company A has run DLL launching this, this, and this is legitimate. So, from app data roaming or some HDR files will be launched, because somebody is using some software. So, we will have it in our profile for this particular corporate customer. So this is, a filter which kicks in after something that's effectively a false positive. And all the new things you will need to triage, and there is no other way around it. So imagine that your administrator will download Mimicots from GitHub from a terminal server because he needs some credentials. I'm not saying it happens every day, but it does happen from time to time, which means that, attackers, they get access through some vulnerability to your server, and it will look just the same, and they will be using the credentials of the same admin. There is no silver bullet here. It needs to be triaged, and that requires a SOC. Such a shame. Well, but don't you talk to the admins? Don't you tell them they shouldn't do it? You know what? If it if you only employ like 500 people or 1,000, it will work, well, potentially. But some of our clients employ or have 30,000 hosts, and they say, 10,000 of our hosts, they're laptops. We don't really know who owns them. We don't know how to get in touch with them because this is how it's often run, and they also need to be defended. It really, really depends on the circumstances, so to speak. So there is this thing called business email compromise. And we do see lots of cases like this, or quite a lot at least. So we are telling you, you need to FA, because until you have two-factor authentication, you will be getting this shit. And they say, no, it's inconvenient, we're not going to do that. And you're telling me about admins. It's even worse with the admins.
В нескольких. Исключение только подтверждает правило.
This is a case, where exceptions prove the rule. Yeah, I guess it takes many years to teach people things, and you cannot do it if you're working for a SOC. Hi, thanks for your presentation. I'm here. In the very center. You've been talking mostly about Windows, and what about Linux?
Поломанные не очень часто, слава богу.
We don't really see many hacked other systems, but there are many vectors there as well. Absolutely. And this is a disclaimer I should have mentioned. I'm talking about corporate Windows networks here. And the simple answer to why here is that over 90% of cases we are dealing with, they are not Nix-based. It is going to change for obvious reasons. Maybe next year I'll be making a report on Nix attacks, but so far it's Windows.
Просик?
A question?
Олег, спасибо за доклад.
Oleg, thank you very much. It's such an interesting report. And if we're talking about the Windows world here, and Windows is still dominant, what are what's your top list of artifacts you will be collecting? It's super easy, really. If you consult the top 10 list I just showed, it should tell you which artifacts I'm looking for. Now, for PowerShell, for example, PowerShell has got its own logs. And if we're talking about service execution, then you will be looking at the system log.
Уже у многих есть телеметрия, поэтому там не
Under the current conditions, there will be incidents where none of this stuff is available. And if it's binaries, we will be looking at the cache. And if we are talking about the initial stage, what should be said is that, we are collecting everything from everywhere. It's not just like we're collecting from just 3 hosts. We will tell our clients, you've got 10,000 hosts, so please collect this list of indicators from this 10,000 hosts. We are not really collecting too many indicators. Do you know cyber string theory? There is this life cycle. Now there's this blue lines you can pull. And the idea here is the same. You are collecting a certain minimum amount of data, which effectively enables you to pull on those strings, and then you will know where and what kind of data to collect. So in some cases, you will be able to do a more extensive triage or to do, say, a memory snapshot. Or in some cases, you will only need just a couple of registry files and, several dozen strings from the event log in order to see that something weird was happening here or not. Hi, I'm Leonid, and I wanted to build on the previous question regarding Nix systems. So how do we know that the entry point to the corporate network is a web service? I mean, if we know it, shall we look for artifacts there? For example, when commands are being executed by, accounts and web services. Yeah, I do agree with that.
Просто хотелось бы это, наверное, дальше добавить в следующие итерации.
Well, you may want to add it to future iterations. Well, we have already decided that my next speech will be about Nix systems and attacks against them. And any mitigation advice, Oleg? Like signed PowerShell and stuff like that?
Слушай, по поводу mitigation, тут чуть сложно в контексте, ну, во-первых...
Mitigation advice is difficult. I mean, the specific advice bits are pretty obvious, but the problem is that, if you do this mitigation, chances are you're going to put your business processes at risk. That's why we're focusing on detection. And we're saying, well, these things will be used pretty much every day, and we need to make sure we're detecting that. Because, IT is sort of expected to simplify things, and if we are doing the opposite of it, we're hamstringing business. We need to go for some equilibrium here. We would love to prohibit everything, but naturally, this is not how it should be done. Again, much will depend on the customer. There are some companies for whom zero trust is okay, and they will prohibit everything. Like an employee will need access to a single information system, and this is it. With a customer like this, obviously, we will have more leeway, so to speak, in terms of prohibitions. But unfortunately, in the modern day world, you cannot really do it in most cases, particularly with larger networks where you have thousands of hosts, where many processes are legacy. And so there, mitigating is not really an option. We will be mostly detecting. And yes, had we mitigated them all, it would have been a boring world for us. Off-mic comment.
Слушай, ну самое первое, не нужно форматировать.
Yeah, I guess the first thing is that you shouldn't allow the users to format the drives. It sounds obvious, but quite often we see that. We tell them, guys, we see a host, and it must be the first host to be compromised. Do nothing about it, isolate it. We are going to investigate it. So they read the message, it's like the first host. And, somebody, disconnects the drive and throws it out the window. It happens so often. Same with lockers. People will often be switching the systems off where the process is already running. And many operators are not really skilled enough, and many of them are pretty bad at actually writing the code. So even if you later on decrypt it or you even pay for it, your system will stay encrypted. So if you don't know what to do nothing, okay? Just wait for the people who know. Hi, thank you very much for the report. Now, my question is like this. This top list of techniques and sub-techniques. What's the variability and variation between industries? There is no difference. It's the same in different countries across industries. So a South African crypto exchange, for example, running Linux machines only, and doing, services of a web service, this is still the list I should care about? No, we are talking about corporate networks again, and we're again talking about Windows-based corporate networks. If we're talking about the Linux-like systems, it will be a different list for sure. The problem, however, at least this is how we see it, is that first, attackers will hack the Windows part before they start playing with the Linux systems. So it all starts with Windows, over SSH, for example, they eventually get access to Linux. Same would be true for, say, industrial enterprises, where there is the industrial control system. The attackers will first compromise the Windows part.
То есть все равно злоумышленникам легче идти по проторенной дорожке по винде, чем придумывать что-то новое.
Не всегда, не всегда.
So it's effectively better to, stick to the same thing? No. Well, Log4Shell, for example, there were lots and lots of Nix cases, so they could be abused as well. It all depends on what the perpetrator wants to do, because some of them want to steal your data, and others, want to steal your money, and yet others want to spread their ransomware. So depending on your system, which can be, say, NICS-based and open to the internet, and it has vulnerabilities and nobody's taking care of them, there are lots of servers like this, you will be attacked over this surface. But if this system is well protected, but it can be accessed from a Windows part of the network, and, chances are, you will be using laptops on the same system as well, and they won't be Linux-based, right? They will be Macs or even Windows-based.
Здравствуйте, спасибо за доклад. И у меня такой вопрос.
Thank you very much.
Что при реализации киллчейнов злоумышленники все чаще начали пользоваться каким-то...
Over the years, we are seeing that, for their kill chains, perpetrators are increasingly using legitimate software. And therefore, the focus of what we're doing has shifted from specific software to methods. What are, the other trends there? Where do you think the focus of our attention will shift tomorrow?
Тут сложно говорить. Вы правы абсолютно. Вот как раз последний год.
You're absolutely right.
Во-первых, есть очень много
As this year has shown. And indeed, there are so many attacks which are effectively manually controlled. So many things previously were automated. Now, both state-sponsored and ransomware operators, they do involve a lot of human intervention. This is something I previously mentioned. Indeed, for the past year, we have been seeing huge usage of very legitimate software. And interestingly, what we're seeing now is that, attackers try to abuse what's already on their machine. Because obviously, if you have AnyDesk or TeamViewer appear on a server or process dump, this is a telltale sign. It's a smoking gun.
Говорить про VMFLand, про какие-то вещи, прям, которые встроены, но может, например, вот в ходе сбора информации.
So, for example, as you're collecting information on the network, you may discover that administrators are using special software to scan the network, or for some other need, and they're using certain random remote access tools. So the attackers will try to use the same software. And in most cases, they will try to use what's already in place. So for a SOC, that will be very difficult to discern. Like some people will be using AnyDesk because they're working remotely, and then attackers will be using AnyDesk as well at the same time. How do you detect that? So far, we have been able to find them, when they continue mounting their attack. So attacks against corporate networks, they usually involve lots of steps. So it will be at the other steps that we will be able to identify them. But it's indeed very important, not to be blinded by all this noise. So the first iteration involves, the attackers using malware. The next one is using legit software. What's the next step? I'm sorry, it's a philosophical question, don't you think? And if you want trends, attackers are trying to use people. That's rather than doing things themselves, they will be asking users to provide authentication data to servers or to remote access tools, and they will request it from the users. So, social engineering, if you ask me. And there can be collusion there, right? So, for example, your SOC can ask you, are you doing something good there? And you'll say yes, and it will be a lie. So it's not even social engineering. This sounds more like espionage and bribery. Yes, thank you so much.